These days, the lizard ridge pattern from Knitty.com has become a very popular Afghan pattern for knitters. And I've had a lot of questions from people about the short rows. Now, there's a few different ways to knit through these short rows. I'm going to give you the simplest one, and I'm going to assume this is the very first time you've ever knitted across a short row. So the lizard ridge pattern is a little bit more interesting because it creates these waves, and you can see by the two different colors of yarn that I've got going that we've got this wave here, and it also creates this sort of bubbly effect in the pattern. Now, when you block out your unit, when you're all done, you can actually flatten it all out, but you'll still get your waves, and you can get rid of the bumps if you want. Myself, I actually like the bumps, and if I was going to make this for myself as an Afghan or a shawl, I would continue on and want to have the bumps for my work, but it's totally up to you. So I'm going to knit through one of the short rows so you have an idea of how you're supposed to pick up the stitches as you're knitting through the short rows. So what does a short row look like? Well, on the right side of the work, the short row, you can see by these three lines here. And that's where each of the stitches was wrapped by another stitch. And that wrapping locks the stitch in place, so it doesn't have that flexibility that slip knotted stitches like this one will have, because you can still tug on that and move it around, but this one here, it only has the flexibility to move in one direction, and that's it. And so this is how you deal with it. A normal stitch is knit like this. Now a short row, we've got this locking stitch here, it needs to be picked up. So we pick up that stitch and you put it back on the needle with the other one, and you knit the two together in one stitch. We just happen to have 3 short rows in a row to pick up, so we're going to do that again. We're sliding that short row stitch back onto the needle, and you're knitting it with the stitch you were originally going to knit. So here's our last one on this right side. Here's our short row stitch. You can see it on an angle across the stitch, and you can see that it's wrapped around the stitch by looking at the back of the work. So you're going to pick up that short row stitch, you're going to slip it back onto the needle beside the one that you want to knit, and you're going to knit the two together. So you're putting your needle right through both stitches. And after a couple of stitches across this pattern, you get to the short rows that are on the opposite side of the pattern. And they are easier to see. You can see that the 3 stitches seem to be much farther spread out. It's a bit of an illusion, the other ones were too, but it's easier to see here. And you can see how that stitch really cuts across the front of the stitch, and you can see how it's wrapped around. So what you need to do now is you need to still pick up that stitch. So you'll have to slip those stitch you want to knit onto the right needle for a second, pick up that short row stitch on your left needle, then slip the stitch you want to knit back onto the left needle, and then you're going to knit through the 2 stitches together. Let's try that again. Slipping it onto the right needle, you pick up your short row stitch, you slip the stitch you want to knit back beside the short row stitch onto the left needle, you knit through the both stitches, and that's done. One more time, slip that stitch you want to knit over onto the right needle temporarily, pick up the short row stitch on your left needle, slide the one you want to knit back onto the left needle, and knit through the 2 stitches. And by doing that, you reduce the amount of holes that you could get around the edge of the short rows. Because those short rows do pull the stitches farther apart, if you just knit those stitches, you would get gaping holes. And when you wash and block your item, you're not going to get rid of the holes as well as you would have liked. So let's try it again. So on the right side of the ridge, the short rows are on an angle out to the right. So we can see them, and we need to pick them up and put them back on the needle and knit them with the stitch that was beside it. So there's my original stitch that I need to knit, and here's the short row I have to knit with it. So I'm putting it back on the needle and I'm knitting. One more time, lift that short row up, put it on the left needle and knit through it. And then when we have the short rows on the opposite side of the ridge, then we need to be moving the stitch over for a second. So here we are, there's our short row right there. So we're going to move the stitch we want to knit over onto the right needle. Lift the short row stitch up onto the left. Replace the stitch we want to knit back onto the left needle and put the needle between the through the two stitches and knit normally. Okay, so we move it over to the right needle, pick up the short row with the left, replace the stitch back on the left needle, then you're going to do a normal knit through both stitches. One more time, move it over, pick up the short row, replace it back on, so now they're sort of crisscross, that's fine, and knit through. And that's how you knit across the short row.